Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today I'm gonna talk about a film that's deeply entrenched in my childhood, and that is The Deep. It's about time. Cue music. The Deep is a 1977 adventure film based on a novel by Peter Benchley of the same name. Peter Benchley was pretty big in the 70s. If you recall, he wrote Jaws, which is a big deal back in the 70s. He did The Deep, and he also did The Island, which was kind of creepy and less well known, and notable for the end scene where Michael Caine guns down about 50 men with the machine gun. Let's just take this in for a moment, shall we? Yes, I suppose. Have anti-aircraft weapon, will travel. Get him, Michael. Clearly one of the highest body counts in one scene by one person with one gun in cinematic history. Not a bad thing to slap on the old resume. This film, The Deep, I never quite understood it. I was so young when it started showing up on cable TV. I didn't really understand what I was seeing. Way back before HBO and Cinemax and all the other cable movie channels, there was something called CineView. It was brand new, and they had movies, but it only had like one or two a day, and they only ran like 3 or 4 in a whole month. And most of the time, CineView is just a test pattern. If you went to the channel and there wasn't a showing, you would get a test panel, a test screen. And then about an hour or two before their scheduled viewings, it was almost like a little art theater. They showed 1 or 2 movies a day. Then the screen would change, and you'd see like a movie curtain and the little tombstone-like seats and so forth. And then they would run the movie, and one of the movies that they ran quite frequently was The Deep, and that was where I got my indoctrination to this film. In our various discussions about going on vacations, my wife is always like, let's go here, let's go there, and every time she mentions Bermuda, let's go to Bermuda, I'm like, I've been to Bermuda. I've never actually been to Bermuda, but I might as well, because I've seen this movie so often. Film stars Jacqueline Bisset, and she was at her most beautiful back in 1977. Very attractive and yet very approachable. Seems like a down-to-earth lady in this movie. Intensely beautiful, and she also has an amazing British accent to boot, so it's like a double threat. Even before I had the perfunctory crush on Mary Ann from Gilligan's Island, there was Jacqueline Bisset playing Gail Burke in this film. And her love interest in this movie is David Sanders, played by Nick Nolte, who at the time was pretty much unknown. All he'd really done was appear in the TV miniseries Rich Man, Poor Man, where he appeared as the poor man as a boxer. Very young, pre-arrest Nick Nolte, some guy, gravelly voice. He and Jacqueline Bisset are an unmarried couple on a vacation in Bermuda, and they're seeing the sights, lots of good food, lots of dancing, as Louis Gossett Jr. later says. They're going around the island on their little mopeds and doing quite a bit of scuba diving also. In their scuba diving, they see a wreck down the deep. I'm not sure how they're seeing these wrecks, because I've not really done any diving, but I've been in the ocean enough to know that you can't see shit. You go down 10 or 15 feet and it's almost pitch black, but they're going down pretty deep. They find this wreck. They're poking around, they're bringing up bottles and eyeglasses and other bits of flotsam from the wreck that they're poking around in. And then you get to your first dramatic moment as Gale, something grabs onto her arm while she's poking around with a stick, through the holes of the hull of this wreck. And it pulls her against the boat, and she can't get away. And she actually takes her regulator out of her mouth and makes it bubble so that Nick Nolte can see that she's in trouble, and he assists her, and her little poking stick has been bitten in half, and we're not really sure what was it that had her, but they get back to the surface. He scolds her a little bit for getting away from him, and then they take their little bits of junk that they caught and go back and turn in their oxygen tanks, and the guy running the little shop, a man named Slake, played by Dick Anthony Williams. You have to declare all your stuff, and if it's valuable, I guess you have to give the government of Bermuda first crack at it, and I guess they're kind of stingy, don't really pay a whole lot. He's looking through, bottles and eyeglasses and other bits of crap, and he comes up with this funky little glass bottle. It's enclosed, it's like an ampule, and it's full of a red liquid. And I gotta say, when I was a kid, I was watching this on Cineview, had no clue what this red liquid was or why it's so important in the rest of the film. All I knew was that it looked delicious and I wanted to eat it, but that's all I knew. Flash forward, that evening, David and Gale are enjoying a lovely evening at like a sort of a beachside discotheque, eating their dinner, having some dancing, and who knows what would follow after that. And a distinguished gentleman comes up to their table, and it's a man who says his name is Henri Bonnebon, played by the distinguished Louis Gossett Jr., and he starts asking him about the items that they found that afternoon on their dive. And he says he is a collector of rare and unusual glass, and he had heard through the grapevine that they found a bit of glass that he would be interested in purchasing. He was an interested buyer, and that the government, if they were to sell it to the government, they don't pay the really premium prices, that he would pay. Nick Nolte plays dumb, and he does it quite well. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Bouillabon. I'm not aware of this piece of glass of which you speak. And he gets up and he says, well, if you change your mind, or if you have a sudden surge in recollection, get in touch with me, and my offer is still good. And he leaves. So at this point, Jacqueline Bisset, Gale Burke, is ready to wash her hands of all this diving and junk collecting. She's ready to see the sights. She's ready to enjoy her vacation, maybe get a little tennis in. But Nick Nolte, after having success finding stuff and having his appetite whetted a little bit by Louis Gossett Jr.'s appearance at dinner, is kind of catching treasure fever. He wants to. He's kind of an explorer, an adventurer, I guess. He wears a crazy t-shirt that talks about climbing Mount Everest, and I don't know if he actually did it or if he just wears a shirt saying Mount Everest, but gives the impression that he's a world traveler and adventure seeker, and he wants to find treasure. So instead of seeing the island and playing tennis with his beautiful companion, he wants to hang out in libraries and look up the stuff that they caught. And Jacqueline Bisset goes along with it. Oh, okay, but you're gonna owe me some tennis. So they're at the library, and Nick Nolte sees a display about a local treasure hunter there in Bermuda named Romer Treese. He decides, hey, maybe we should go see this Romer Treese guy. Maybe he can give us some tips. Maybe he can clue us on some of the stuff that we've caught. So they hop on their little mopeds, and I guess the librarian clued them in on where this Romer Treese lived, and he lives up on a hillside in a lighthouse. Knock on his door, he answers, and Romer Treese is played by Robert Shaw, and if he looks familiar, it's because he was in Jaws as well, sort of recycled from one role to the next. And Nick Nolte and Jacqueline Bisset show Romer Treese their art items that they found, and he's good enough to take a look. After a little cleaning, after cutting, knocking off some barnacles and other things, he finds that they found like a Spanish medallion of some sort. And that's really what had caught Nick Nolte's interest was this coin, and he thought, well, they found one coin, maybe they can find another coin. Robert Shaw's like, well, where'd you find all this stuff? He shows him on the map. Robert Shaw reproaches them a little bit. He says, hey, this is the Goliath you're diving around in. No one's supposed to be going into Goliath. That's a World War II munitions ship. You go in there, you blow yourself sky high. It's too dangerous. He looks at the medallion, and there's a beautiful lady on it, and it's got a very old date, and it seems like it's valuable. And Robert Treese says, well, one medallion could help pay for your holiday if you don't drink too much. And then as he's sorting through their bag, he comes across that little funky piece of glass with the red liquid in it, and he's like, where'd you get what's this? Where'd you get this? And Nick Nolte says, well, that was on the Goliath. Robert Shaw wants to know exactly where it came from. Where'd you find this? And they show him on the map. And while they're pointing it out, he kind of hides the glass. And then he goes back to the medallion and tries to sidetrack them a little bit so that they forget all about that little piece of glass. He congratulates them on their find. One medallion, that's cool. You probably paid for your holiday. And Nick Nolte wants to keep searching. He's like, well, if that was down there, what else could be down there? Robert Shaw's not interested. He's like, you got lucky. The ocean's not a department store. One day you got nothing. Next day a storm brews up and you got King Midas's treasure down there. But don't go filling your head full of sweet dreams, because not gonna be happy with the results. Nick Nolte wants to argue some more, and then Robert Shaw throws him out. I don't have all day to waste with you people. And while they're on their mopeds heading back to their hotel, this crazy truck stops them, forces them off their mopeds and into the truck, and takes them to some creepy warehouse. And who's waiting for them? Louis Gossett Jr. It turns out he's not a collector of rare bottles, but in fact is into more nefarious dealings there on the island. And he wants to know where that bottle was. And he's mad. He's like, you forced me to take what you would not let me pay for. Very elegant man, Louis Gossett. It's hard, even when he's playing a villain, it's hard not to like him. He's a very likable guy. Well, they pat Nick Nolte down. They don't find shit. And then he makes Jacqueline Bisset strip, but it's a very PG rated stripping. You don't see anything. Takes off her top. He really doesn't tell them what he's looking for, but they kind of guess it has to do with that crazy bottle again. But of course Robert Shaw stole it in the previous scene. They don't have it. Louis Gossett Jr. tells Jacqueline Bisset, put your clothes back on. And then he gives them a warning. He says, enjoy yourselves tonight. Dice dinner, go dancing, but be off the island by tomorrow. He lets him go. Well, Nick Nolte's pissed. They head back to Robert Shaw's lighthouse, bang on the door. He opens it, and Nick is like, okay, what the hell is going on? So Robert Shaw takes him down to the dock, and we're introduced to Eli Wallach, who's in the role of Adam Coffin, an old swabby. A cut scene, a scene that hit the cutting room floor. We see the actual shipwreck of that ship, the Goliath, during World War II when Robert Shaw was just a little boy. He's walking down the beach after a storm and turns up some sea trash on the beach, and there's a guy, and it turned out to be Adam Coffin. But that was a scene that has long since been cut, and I've not been able to find it on the internet anywhere. Eli Wallach, Adam Coffin, was actually on that ship, and he tells them that little ampule they found is part of a consignment of 90,000 more of them. And they're ampules of morphine. And when I was a kid, that went right over my head. I'm like, I have no idea. What the hell does that mean? So what? It still looks delicious. I had no idea what that meant. Nick Nolte is like, well, why didn't you tell us that? That's halfway to heroin. And then Robert Shaw says the Henri Bouillabont, his name is really Henri Cloche, and he's from Haiti. and he's a drug dealer. And he'd always heard legends about the Goliath and how there's all this free morphine packaged up and ready to go in, nice glass ampules there. If he can get his hands on this morphine, he can make a killing, and all that junk will be on the streets of New York and other places in a week. Robert Shaw says, well, I'm going out there tonight, and I'm going to dive, and I'm going to see if there's any more of this shit. And Nick Nolte's like, well, you're not diving without me, because he's still got the treasure fever. He found this medallion, and he's determined to find more treasure down there. And Robert Shaw's like, okay, but don't slow me down, don't get in my way, don't piss me off, you can come. And of course, Jacqueline Bisset is not having any of this. She begs him not to dive. She's like, I came down here to hang out with the man I love and have fun, not to get involved with World War II munition ships and morphine and drug dealers. Don't go. And he's like, no, I'm diving. I am diving. And then they have an argument in their hotel about this very thing. And how is it that when people argue in the movies, the lady is always undressed? There she is, just wearing a towel as they fight. But he's on a mission. He leaves her to go to the ship with Robert Shaw. It's dark and creepy, but adventure is in the offing. And off they go. Back at the local saloon, Adam Coffin is pretty salty because Robert Shaw wouldn't let him go dive to his old ship. So he's just there at the saloon drinking rum. And sure enough, here come Louis Gossett Jr.'s men with a glass of rum, and they fill his cups ostensibly to ply him for information. Back aboard the ship, it's diving time. They kit up, and down they go. I always found these parts very claustrophobic when I was a kid, and even today. You're swimming around in the dark, crawling into these really tight spaces with a tank of oxygen strapped to your back. It's just not a thing that makes me comfortable. I like caving and things of that nature. Crawling in tight spaces I think is fun, but the added factor of drowning I think just sort of spoils the mood for me. So they find a hole and head on in, and it's pretty tight and dangerous inside. There's sand and artillery shells and shit all over the place. Not exactly a safe place to be hanging out. And right off the bat, they start finding Louis Gossett Jr.'s morphine ampules. There's one, and then they quickly find a crap ton more. So up on the shore, Louis Gossett is doing a happy dance because there's all kinds of morphine down there, and Robert Shaw isn't having any of it. He quickly wires the ship to blow. He's going to blow it to Kingdom Come. He's a man of principle, and he does not want this morphine to fall into the wrong hands, namely Louis Gossett Jr.'s hands. Meanwhile, Nick Nolte is looking around for treasure as Robert Shaw continues his work. Meanwhile, remember that issue Jacqueline Bisset had at the beginning of the film was something grabbed her arm as she was poking around? Well, Nick Nolte's about to find out just exactly what that was that she ran afoul of. And it turns out to be a massive moray eel living in the watery bowels of this World War II munition ship. And it's coming after Nick as well, but he is saved by the inadvertent flashing of his aquatic camera. It confuses the eel and it returns to its home, possibly to be revisited later in the movie. Time will tell. So after that one-sided encounter, Nick Nolte returns to Robert Shaw and helps him rig the ship to blow by weighting down his explosives with stuff. He gives him a cylindrical metal device that he doesn't really know what it is. Robert Shaw looks at it and then stops what he's doing and puts it in his belt. They find a convenient air pocket. Robert Shaw tells Nick Nolte he's not blowing the ship at this time, doesn't explain why, and then Nick Nolte tells him there's a giant moray eel in the next compartment. Might want to watch that area. Might be a good idea. They return safely topside and quickly discover that Louis Gossett Jr. has left them a little voodoo surprise tacked to the wall of the bridge. It's a cat that's been horribly mangled, and I remember as a kid being really afraid of that cat. I don't know why, it really scared me. Nick Nolte's a little put off by this voodoo, but Robert Shaw, sage Bermudian, couldn't give two poops. Back at the hotel, Jacqueline Bisset is hanging out in a beautiful evening gown waiting for Nick Nolte's return when someone tries the latch, and she at first thinks it's Nick Nolte, but soon discovers it is not Nick Nolte. And that's not Nick Nolte either. Nick Nolte at this moment is racing back to the hotel as they know Louis Gossett Jr. is afoot. And he's getting ready for some action. As they negotiate the rocks, more voodoo is happening at the hotel as Louis Gossett Jr.'s men do voodoo on Jacqueline Bisset. So, after a few exploits of running from and killing some of Louis Gossett Jr.'s men, Nick Nolte makes his way back to their hotel room. Nick Nolte discovers that voodoo has been done upon Jacqueline Bisset, but apparently nothing more, thankfully. And so, for Nick Nolte, that's it. He sees what could have happened to his love, Jacqueline Bisset, and realizes that he lost touch of what he was there to do, is to enjoy their vacation, not get involved with drug dealers like Louis Gossett Jr. And so that's it. They're planning on leaving first thing in the morning once the airport opens. Robert Shaw entreats them that it's really not safe on the island and to come with him to his home where it will be safe. Robert Shaw then deploys his men, and Jacqueline Bisset heads off to bed after a trying evening. Robert Shaw then tells Nick Nolte that this item he found but didn't know what it was is actually quite important. That it's a 3-lock box and a escutcheon plate. And a 3-lock box means that something very valuable was being transported within, i.e., treasure of some sort. So that Spanish medallion that Nolte found actually isn't alone down there. There's probably something else, and this 3-lock box proves it. And then Robert Shaw says, so whatever we find down there, a lot or a little, half yours, half mine. But what am I saying? You guys are heading back to New York City and all the things that go with it. What a life. But then Jacqueline Bisset emerges, unbeknownst to them, and listens to them speak. And apparently, she's a lot tougher than she first lets on, and she's not quite so ready to go home, even though she'd had a horrific evening. She's willing to tough it out and see what sort of treasure can be found, provided Louis Gossett Jr. can be somehow mollified to, leave them alone while they search for the treasure. So the next day, Robert Shaw and his main henchman, Kevin, head out to a very seedy-looking cricket match where he has a public meeting with Louis Gossett Jr. No voodoo this time. And Robert Shaw informs Louis Gossett Jr. that if he wants the morphine down there in the Goliath, that he's got it. And Louis Gossett is like, ho ho ho, you've only the gall to claim the ownership. It's still down there under the drink. And he says, yeah, but I've rigged that thing 3 ways to Sunday, and if the wrong person goes snooping around, all that shit's gonna blow sky high. So he makes a deal with Louis Gossett Jr. that he will get him the morphine. He needs 3 days to get the morphine, and just to leave him and those tourists alone. And Louis Gossett Jr. agrees, is suspicious though, because Robert Shaw in the past has been very anti-drug. Of course, Robert Shaw doesn't want Louis Gossett Jr. to know a thing about this treasure they're finding, because apparently treasure trumps drugs. And if he finds out that there's treasure down there, well, then he's going to be all over them like a pair of Fruit of the Looms. So they got to keep it quiet and work fast. He only has a few days to get this shit out of the drink. So down they go again, this time with heavy-duty equipment to clear the sand away very quickly. And they start harvesting morphine for Louis Gossett Jr. And there's a lot to harvest, but of course that's not their main objective. Their main objective is to find more treasure. Robert Shaw is good with it, but unfortunately, our intrepid trio discovers that this wreck is far from stable. They feel the earth shaking and boulders dropping, so this ship is like resting at the edge of an underwater cliff, and it's totally not a good thing to be in this wreck for long, which will hinder their treasure and drug collecting efforts. So they're sending up morphine at a slow rate, just enough to keep Louis Gossett Jr. happy. But then Robert Shaw accidentally sucks up a live hand grenade, and it's on. Kaboom! And the whole ship starts rocking and rolling, and Nick Nolte gets pulled into an underwater tunnel that it pulls so hard he actually loses his mask and has no oxygen. You need oxygen under the water, just an FYI. And even though he has no air, Nick Nolte is loving life as he finds this tunnel is a tunnel of riches. He's finding treasure everywhere, like this little pine cone that's full of treasure. And Robert Shaw comes with his mask to rescue him, unwillingly, of course. Puts his mask back on, and he's just happy as a clam. They quickly find a bell with the name Griffin on it. So obviously, underneath the wreck of the Goliath is the wreck of a much older, as of yet unknown ship. And that appears to be where all this fresh cheddar is coming from. The older ship, whatever it happens to be. The area is still rocking and rolling from the hand grenade exploit. So they decide they better get out while the getting's good, even though they're just now getting to the good stuff. Forget these ampules. They want whatever the Griffin was carrying, but no, it's time to vacate. Back at the local watering hole, Louis Gossett Jr. is thirsty for information and plies Adam Coffin with more rum. Apparently, the key to unlocking Adam Coffin's soul is a glass full of rum. Well, but I guess whatever works. But but Adam Coffin is singing like a bird. Wherever he knows, Louis Gossett Jr. also knows. The next day, they're back at it again, and their efforts are yielding fruit. Topside, Adam Coffin is on a mission to get Louis Gossett Jr. some info. He's checking all their pockets, seeing if he can find anything. And right off the bat, he finds a map drawn by Jacqueline Bisset showing the tunnel underneath the Goliath full of shit, and he realizes there's something going on other than just drugs beneath the waves, and is determined to supply Louis Gossett Jr. with this lucrative information. Meanwhile, Louis Gossett Jr. decides to send Robert Shaw and the rest a warning. They start chumming the water to get the sharks all frothed up. And me and my wife visited the Caribbean on a cruise, and we're out swimming in a netted area, but there were sharks everywhere outside the net. But they weren't. It wasn't like great whites, coming to eat you. They were smaller sharks. I don't know what kind. They really didn't really bother you. They just swam around. Sometimes they'd swim right past you on the other side of the net, not really paying attention to you one little bit. But I guess in a case when you're blooding up the water, they tend to freak out just a bit. So it looks like we have a full-on feeding frenzy on our hands, and our intrepid trio know nothing about this until now, when they start fouling up their airlines, and they realize they're in a peck of trouble. The sharks are creating quite a mess down there, so they decide to use their sand gun to create like a column of bubbles and swim up into it. They have to cut their air hoses because the sharks are entangled in them. So up they go. Once they get topside, Robert Shaw is good and pissed. What the hell happened? Why didn't you use a compressor to warn us? And Adam Coffin makes up a BS story that nobody buys. And then he sees some treasure in a bag, and that's game on. Now he knows that there's treasure going on down below, and if he knows it, it's not going to be long before our friend Louis Gossett Jr. knows it. So things are just getting more complicated as time passes. Back at Robert Shaw's place, they soon realize they have a big problem on their hands, other than drug dealers and sharks. They realize they don't have any proof that the treasure they found has been under the ocean for hundreds of years. The Robert Shaw tells them, there's a lot of fakes out on the market. Real gold, real jewels, but they're fake. They've never been in a shipwreck. They've never been at the bottom of the ocean. And that just renders their value almost nothing, other than the value of the materials, the gold, the jewels, what have you. To be considered treasure makes it priceless. The value beyond what it's made out of. It has a whole value unto itself. But in order to prove that, you have to have a provenance. You have to have some sort of historical document that describes in detail the items you have discovered. If you can establish a provenance, you can prove that your items came from the sea, and then that makes them worth millions, or makes them priceless, basically. Unfortunately, things are escalating fast. Louis Gossett Jr.'s men kill Robert Shaw's henchman, Kevin, and Robert Shaw is not happy about it, and he says, I'm going down there right now, and I'm blowing that ship to Kingdom Come. I'm not going to let Louis Gossett Jr. get one finger on any of that morphine, and I don't care who goes with me. And Nick Nolte's like, well, you're going to have to blow me up too, Robert Shaw. I need my proof, and I saw it down there just before the sharks happened, and I'm going to go down there and get it. And he's like, well, fine, suit yourself, but don't blame me if you end up dead. Adam Coffin sneaks up to the lighthouse to get his hands on the drugs, and kaboom! Robert Shaw has rigged it to blow, so there goes all the drugs. I wonder, gone. So here we go into the climactic scene. It's funny that Robert Shaw's house is now on fire, especially after the cupola of the lighthouse lands on it is burning, but doesn't seem to think twice about it. We move on. The Bermuda Fire Department is top notch, and they'll have it out while we're gone. Don't worry about it. Robert Shaw says, when I light this fuse, you've got 3 minutes, and that is all. I don't care if you've got the Holy Grail in your midst. Get out. Nick Nolte's down there trying to unearth a piece of treasure, and he had seen it on an ancient man, or not ancient, but a manifest describing that very item, a dragon with emerald eyes. So that's his proof right there. That's his fortune and glory. But here comes Louis Gossett Jr. and company to mess things up as Robert Shaw completes his demolition work here. Nick Nolte's finally having success unearthing his dragon with emerald eyes, his provenance that he's been dreaming about. Meanwhile, we have a fly in the ointment as Louis Gossett Jr. and his harpoon gun show up. Also, more flies. His henchman has got a shotgun shell at the end of a stick and is going to attack Nick Nolte with that stick. He misses. Nick Nolte fires up the sand gun. And topside, Jacqueline Bissette's got her own problems as Slake shows up, ready to do her irreparable harm. But she mans up like a man and takes him right out. Problem solved there. Down below, Nick Nolte still having issues crawling through these tiny spaces with a guy trying to kill him, which is never a good thing. Yeah, this gives me the heebies right here. Just, ugh. And then Louis Gossett Jr. pulls a bitch move and shoots him in the back of the leg with a harpoon. That's gotta hurt. He's bleeding. He's like, what the hell? It's you, Louis Gossett Jr. He manages to pull the plug on his dynamite down there, so it's spinning away. 3 minutes, clock is ticking. They fight, and who shows up? It's the moray eel. Gets a whole head full of Louis Gossett Jr. That's gotta be a horrible way to go. His little mask cracks. He's getting pulled into the moray eel's lair to be lunch. Wow. Nick Nolte shows up after dispatching his guy, puts his regulator back in his mouth. He's saying, we got to get out of here. Nick Nolte is like, no. I got to go get my provenance. And he's like, no, you got to leave. He cuts his air hose, so Nick Nolte has to go. Time is almost done. As you can see, the fuse is almost at the dynamite. Here comes Robert Shaw. Still at the harpoon seems to be doing absolutely nothing. So why bother? Nick Nolte makes it to the surface. And then there is a massive explosion down below. Everything is sort of doom and gloom as the sea bubbles, but up from the depths rises an arm with a provenance attached to it. It's Robert Shaw, and he throws the provenance, I guess, and it's lucky for us that it was a good throw, because it'd be funny if it fell back into the water and you'd be like, you idiot, what happened to the provenance? Why'd you throw the provenance? Anyways, that is The Deep, 1977, a staple of my favorite films of all time, directed by Peter Yates. Just really fun movie. I can watch it over and over again. If it's on TV, I always watch it. I'll get it out, put it on the DVD. My wife is always like, what are you doing watching this crazy film again? No, I just love it. It just feels to me like the Caribbean, even though, whoa, wait a second, even though I know the Bermuda has nothing to do with the Caribbean, it's in the middle of the Atlantic for the most part, it still has a Caribbean vibe. When we go on our cruises, we've been on several, I'm always looking around at dinner, seeing if Cloche is around, if he's going to come up and sit down and make us a deal, or what sort of treasures are right beneath our feet in the water. Usually I find absolutely nothing. Anywho, hope you enjoyed this review, spoiler-laden analysis, one of my favorite films, The Deep. This is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.